The Toyota 2JZ, Nissan RB26, and Mitsubishi 4G63 all have one thing in common. They're known as legendary Japanese engines that everyone seemingly loves. But what about the engines that not everybody loves? Well, that's exactly what we're going to take a look at today. The worst JDM engines of all time. Let's get right into it. Okay, so as a quick preface, it's worth mentioning that not every single engine on this list is a terrible engine. In fact, a lot of them are actually pretty decent engines once you fix the problems with them. That being said, this list is in no particular order, so be sure to drop your list down below letting me know what you think are the worst JDM engines ever. Alright, I know the Subaru guys are absolutely going to hate me and I'm probably going to be banned from vape shops for the rest of my life, but I think there's no denying that the Subaru EJ, the EJ30, and EJ25 are some of the worst engines of all time. And I get it. The excuse is that it's just the people who drive these, and the problems are from lack of maintenance. And while both of those excuses might be a partial truth, they're also a partial lie. It's hard to ignore the sea of people who have modified Subarus and had them explode, including the guys over at Donut Media. At the end of the day, the design for the EJ engine was inspired from an aircraft engine, an airplane engine. And if you've ever worked on an EJ, if you've ever taken them apart, you know that they have a ton of vacuum lines and a ton of hard lines all over the top of the engine. It's kind of a complicated design, and frankly, it's not that good. But really, the worst of the problems seem to lie with the 2.5 liter variant of the EJ. All in, including all different forms of the EJ, there's about 23 variations of the EJ, so it came in a lot of different forms throughout the decades. The problems start with head gasket failure, excessive oil consumption, premature turbocharger failure, difficulty tuning, and lack of lubrication in the bottom end. Ultimately, a lot of these problems really come up when you start tuning Subaru engines. When you start tuning an EJ20 or an EJ25, start modifying them, that's when the worst of the problems show up. But just about all the problems can be fixed with a wrench and some time on the internet figuring out what to do. But the tuning difficulties in particular have resulted in a lot of blown up EJs. If you were to look at a company like Crawford Performance, for example, they have a lot of experience working with the EJ platform and know how to get it just right to avoid potential fueling issues, which can easily result in an exploded bottom end thanks to Subaru's use of cast pistons, but not every tuner is like that. In fact, many tuners just aren't that good with the EJ. You could even make the argument that Subaru themselves did not properly tune the EJ, but I'm not going to go that deep into this video. Add on top of all of that, the famous ringland failure issues, and you begin to see why the EJ can be quite a problematic engine. But if you like working on your car and you know how to work on an EJ engine, they're really not that bad to deal with. But if you want something ultra reliable and fast, you're probably best looking elsewhere. Alright, that's enough picking on Subaru. Let's aim our sights at Nissan, and no, not for their creation of the worst sounding trumpet exhausts ever with the VQ, but rather their failure with the VG. Now specifically what we're talking about is the VG30DETT. This is the engine that you can find under the hood of the Nissan 300ZX twin turbo that we got here in the States. You can also find this engine in 2 Nissan concept cars, but that's pretty irrelevant here. This engine output a pretty decent 300 horsepower and 283 pound-feet of torque, which was a pretty good amount at the time. Sure, the peak numbers might seem a little bit underwhelming for a 3-liter twin turbo engine, especially compared to something like an RB26, which had similar peak numbers but less displacement. But the important part here isn't the peak numbers, it's the power under the curve, where the VG30DETT was able to deliver a very good torque curve. But that really doesn't matter because Nissan fumbled the bag pretty bad in a few key areas with the VG30DETT. The first major problem is that this engine is physically massive and Nissan shoved it into a pretty small engine bay. It's absolutely terrible to work on, there's no room to do anything, and it's an absolute pain in the butt anytime you have to do literally anything to this engine. And on top of that, it's a pretty heavy engine thanks to Nissan using a cast iron block, but to be fair, that was pretty standard back then. Then there are the problems with the twin turbo system itself being far more complex and problematic than it needs to be. Now to be fair, there hadn't been many production cars with a twin turbo V engine up until that point, so developing a perfect system was kind of out of the question. It was bound to have some amount of problems. Nissan did what they thought was best, but ultimately it resulted in a turbo system that is quite a bit more problematic than you'd expect. Then you have the oiling system, which is known for not delivering enough oil to the bearings and specifically killing the rod bearings prematurely. Part of which is because this engine is only designed to hold 4.3 quarts of oil, which is very, very little for an engine this size with 2 turbochargers attached to it. And if you can fix the oiling system, which is actually really easy to do by just installing an oversized oil pan, the VG30 isn't actually that bad of an engine and it's capable of making quite a bit of power. Only as long as you don't mind hating your life every time you have to work on the thing. Now, I know Toyota is known for producing some of the best engines in the world, both in terms of performance and reliability, but that doesn't mean that they're perfect. Now, before we got the holy grail of automotive engines with the Toyota 2JZ, they had some pretty serious learning to do with the 1J, and then before that, the 7M GTE. Now, like every other engine on the list, the 7M GTE isn't all that bad if you can fix its issues. But that being said, the major problem with the 7M is just that, a major problem. What I'm talking about are the head gaskets, the head bolts, and the cylinder head itself, all three of which kind of combine to make one big problem with the 7M GTE. During assembly, Toyota failed to torque the head bolts as tight as they should have been, but it's just enough where it might be fine for years or even decades before the problem shows itself. Once Toyota discovered this issue on their assembly line, they changed their assembly process and raised the torque spec for the head bolts. But that still left thousands of engines out there, thousands of 7M GTEs with head bolts that were just a little bit under where they were supposed to be as far as torque spec, and ultimately that just left thousands of engines blowing up for no reason. And because the head gasket and head lifting problem can go almost unnoticed in some cases, you can very easily end up with coolant in your oil, which then ultimately reduces the lubrication in the engine and will prematurely kill the engine bearings. And normally this results in rod knock on the 7M. Outside the issues with the cylinder head though, the 7M GTE is not that bad of an engine, and although it really doesn't compare to the 1JZ or the 2JZ in terms of reliability or performance potential, it laid the groundwork that those engines were built on. Now, this next engine on the list, I'm pretty sure about 99% of you have never even heard of, and that's because for some godforsaken reason, we did not get cool Japanese diesels here in the US. And what I'm talking about is the Nissan ZD30 or ZD30, depending how you want to pronounce it. This little 3-liter inline-6 engine powered various Nissan SUVs and pickups throughout the years, including the Navara and the Patrol. On the surface, it seems much like any other kind of small inline-6 diesel engine, but the problems are pretty severe. So severe that this engine is often referred to as a grenade. The problems start with Nissan listing an incorrect number for the oil volume at 6 liters of oil, when the engine really requires 8.3 liters of oil. Now that's a pretty big difference, and eventually Nissan realized this issue and had dealerships fix it by adding more oil and a shorter dipstick. On top of that, the ECU was calibrated in such a way that overboost situations and massive boost spikes were a very real possibility, leading loads of these engines with completely exploded pistons unexpectedly. Then there are issues with the exhaust gas recirculation system, which could also lead to piston failure, a mass airflow sensor that was great at getting covered in oil, and then giving the ECU incorrect readings, which again could grenade the pistons. With all of these issues and more, the ZD30 or ZD30, whatever you want to call it, has become known for being quite a problematic engine and exploding pretty much randomly. Now, this final engine on the list might come as a surprise because it's yet another Toyota engine. Not just one, but 2 Toyota engines on this list of terrible JDM engines. Man, I can't wait to see the comments on this one. The engine in question is the 3VZE, and at first glance, it appears to be just another 1990s Toyota creation. Designed to power the 4Runner, it marked a significant milestone as the first engine larger than a 4-cylinder to be used in the 4Runner, which was really needed with how gutless the 4Runner was with the 22R and 22RE engines. Now, this is a 3-liter single overhead cam V6, producing about 150 horsepower and 180 pound-feet of torque. So what lands it on our list of terrible JDM engines? The head gaskets. However, this head gasket issue in particular with this engine is kind of unique in the fact that it's compounded with some coolant system issues, namely air bubbles being extremely common on this engine, meaning the cooling system is often misdiagnosed as a head gasket, or the head gasket issue itself completely goes unnoticed and your mechanic just thinks it's the cooling system. Either way, it's pretty bad. And it is worth noting that this engine also gained quite a reputation for being one of the leakiest Toyota engines of all time, particularly for a 1990s Toyota engine. But like all the boomers say, if it's still leaking oil, there's still oil in it. And in all honesty, outside the head gasket issue, which really isn't that hard to fix, but it is a pretty severe problem, the 3VZE isn't actually that bad of an engine, it's just a little bit underpowered. Alright guys, that's all I've got for you today. That is 5 of the worst JDM engines of all time. Be sure to drop a comment down below letting me know what you would add to this list, what other engines you would add, or what other engines you would take away from this list. I want to see your comments down there. While you're down there, smash the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video, get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos, check out some of the other stuff on the channel, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We post a lot on everywhere, and I'll see you guys in the next one.